There we go. Well, let's talk a little bit about the fun stuff. I think that both, well, not so fun, but the stuff that Daniel and I were talking about earlier in terms of, like, these pathogens, they never, or hardly ever, they come alone, right? So PRRS and PCV2, they are party animals. They love to go with other, pathogens and then cause wreck. So this is the story that we're gonna tell. I just wanted to give you some perspective on what are the levels that we see in terms of diagnosis for those different pathogens, for those two pathogens, PRRS and PCV2, at the Iowa State Diagnostic Lab. So we do receive a lot of cases, and these are cases only where the pathologist had the opportunity to look at the tissues, both grossly and microscopically, and also do the PCRs or different tests to confirm that those diseases were present. And you can see here in green that PRRS is by far a lot more diagnosed than PCV2 is. But PCV2, it's not a negligible number of cases. One of the other things that I want to highlight is that back in 2007, we had way more cases of PCV2 than we see here in the last few years or after that. So the PCV2, the first PCV2 vaccine was introduced in the US around 2006. So 2007, we're still kind of like in adoption stages, but you can see that clearly that the vaccines had an impact on PCV2 diagnosis, right? It never went down to zero, and that's probably because some of the issues we were discussing earlier in terms of like a compliance or other co-infections that could be preventing PCV2 from being fully controlled. One of the other things that we don't see here is that PCV2 or even PRRS are being a problem for a single pig, or is it a populational problem, right? So, and that's also important also to put in perspective. But just to show, these are not cases that they were diagnosed together. This is just total cases that those two pathogens have been diagnosed over the years. And then PRRS, since 2020, we've been detecting or diagnosing a little bit more. And PCV2 has been kind of like an upward trend as well. Not as much as PRRS, but getting there. Now, the other question that I had, and I wanted to get a little bit more perspective, and we showed some data on this before, was in terms of like those co-infections. So the universe here is, I checked all the cases where we had the confirmed diagnosis of circovirus type 2 disease, and then I downloaded the data of all of the different co-diagnoses. So this is not only detection, right? The pathologist in the case was able to confirm that Pasteurella, Streptococcus suis, influenza, Glasserella, or PRRS were also involved in these cases. So you see that there are some cases where PCV2 was actually alone. Either that, or we were not able to assign a co-diagnosis, even though we saw lesions that were suggestive of something else. So sometimes we don't have like the ability or the discretion to dig to the deeper level to assign an etiology to a case. And in a lot of cases, that's that could be here what's happening in those cases where PCV2 was diagnosed alone. It wasn't necessarily by itself, but this is what we're seeing. But in most cases, you can see that really PRRS is there, right? So PRRS in the US, also another endemic pathogen. Of all of the other co-infections that we could have, it's probably the worst combination possible, right? One thing that we're not seeing here is like, what's the timing of the infection, which is really important for the outcomes that the pigs are going to have. But then we have influenza, in the different number of bacterial pathogens that can, it's not only PCV2 and PRRS that are going to make those pathogens actually worse, those bacterial pathogens, but the presence of those bacterial pathogens in there infecting the pigs that are infected with PCV2 and PRRS can actually also cause PRRS and PCV2 to actually have worse effects. So let's talk a little bit about that here in the next few slides. So just showing demonstrating here some of the effects that are in the literature of what can happen when we have infection by one of those pathogens, followed by other, or simultaneously. So PRRS followed by PCV2 infection, you have like an increase in clinical disease, increase in viral loads of both pathogens, and lesions related to both pathogens. PRRS followed by PCV2D, also increase in the lesions, viral loads, cytokine response, and weight loss. And the cytokine response here, it was just one of the things that's going to lead to all of those clinical signs that we're seeing with those depressed pigs, but also some of the lesions that we're going to observe. PRRS and PCV2 together at the same time. So increased PCV2 systemic replication and prolonged viremia and shedding. So not only the pig suffers more, there are more lesions, but that pig's going to be sicker for a longer time. And that's a big problem, right? Sicker for a longer time, probably higher likelihood of death, but also shedding for a longer period, which just means more opportunity for other pigs to get infected as well. Some of the other co-infections here now, talking a little bit about bacterial co-infections with circovirus, right? So circovirus type 2 with Mycoplasma hyorinus. And sometimes we just think about Mycoplasma hyorinus that's opportunistic pathogen that's going to cause polycerositis, sometimes arthritis. But here together with PRRS, see what happens. We're going to, or with PCV2, we're going to have increase in the severity of the lung lesions, increase in the tissue distribution of circovirus type 2, so it's going to be more propense to get like a more systemic distribution, and increase in the cytokine response as well. Co-infection with PCV2 and Streptococcus suis. It's going to increase the survivability of the Streptococcus suis in the pig. It's going to increase the severity of pneumonia and also other types of systemic lesions. So it's never a good thing, right? It's never, okay, we're going to give this other pathogen to this pig, and it's going to actually make the circovirus or the PRRS to be less problematic. PCV2 and Mycoplasma, increasing the PCV2 systemic disease with lymphoid depletion, inflammation in lymph nodes, also interstitial pneumonia, PCV2 replication, mortality, and clinical disease. PCV2 in influenza, increased in PCV2-associated disease, replication, and lesions. And this is just talking about the lesions, right? But there is a lot of data out there that actually talks about the true economic impact of those pathogens. Kara Hayden had in the ASV years before, like infection with influenza, PRRS, and Mycoplasma, leading to increased losses of about $10 per pig, right? And I think this is some of the work that we should actually repeat nowadays, especially with those different PRRS lineages that we have today. That impact could be even higher for those different co-infections. And that's why when we think about those co-infections between PRRS and PCV2 and others, it's important to understand how they're acting. Are they acting as primary pathogens, or are they manifesting because there's something else that's not properly balanced that's allowing that disease to manifest? They are both important pathogens that can be involved in the porcine respiratory disease complex. They can have a synergistic effect, so it's important that we keep in mind the control of both of those pathogens, but not only those, but also Mycoplasma, influenza, and other bacterial pathogens. And one approach to think about is that for some of those pathogens, we don't have like as good tools as we have for PCV2, for example, but then you control what you can, right? You make sure that you have a very good control of PCV2, you make sure you have a very good control of PRRS, You have make sure that you have a very good control of mycoplasma, and give the pig the best environmental possible conditions that are going to allow those pigs to thrive. And that's it. Thank you, Oliver.